7 o'clock. Start with the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call. Clerk Cody.
Supervisor Gunning is excused. Treasurer Rice.
Here.
Trustee Hauk.
Here.
Trustee Milky.
Here.
Trustee Lannon.
Here.
Trustee Worley.
Here.
Clerk Cody here.
Okay. Pro tem.
Oh, I'll make a motion to make Treasurer Rice chair of this meeting.
Supported.
All in favor, or any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. All right. And so we need to move on to approval of the agenda.
I'll make a motion that we approve the agenda.
Second.
All right. Any discussion?
I had one question.
Okay.
For the manager, I guess. We had made a motion in the last meeting to query our attorney. Is that anything that you're prepared at this point to bring up?
There won't be anything on that tonight.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Any more discussion? All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. And there's no presentations or public hearings, so we're going to open at 7:01 to public comment. This is restricted to 3 minutes regarding items on this agenda. And seeing none, we will close public comment and move on to reports and board comments. So the appointments, we can't really do that without
Can't do it without Ben.
without Ben. So, moving on down. Planning Commission and ZBA updates by the Township Planner.
Good evening, Board.
Good evening.
Evening.
So this month, the Zoning Board of Appeals, we met. We didn't have any action items on the agenda. We had scheduled a show cause hearing, which show cause hearing gives a violator a chance to come before a board and explain to them why they are not in violation of the zoning ordinance. Fortunately, the issue had been resolved prior to the show cause hearing, and so we decided to cancel the show cause hearing. There was no issue anymore. There was also a variance for an accessory building that had been postponed. The applicant decided to change their construction plans, design an accessory building that met the zoning code, and so they withdrew their application. Zoning board accepted their withdrawal application. They did approve their 2020 meeting calendar schedule, and so that sums up what we did at the Zoning Board of Appeals. The Planning Commission didn't really have a heavy agenda as well, but we did dedicate the majority of that meeting to finishing the proposed zoning ordinance rewrite update that we're doing. We were able to get all the way until the very end of section 15. We had a little bit more to go that we're going to tackle at this November meeting, but at the time it was late and the Planning Commission decided they wanted to just call it a night and tackle those last few sections of section 15 later. They did also appoint Ryan Buckley as the new zoning board liaison from the Planning Commission to the ZBA. They elected a new vice chair with the vacancy, and that's Denise Webster. And then they reaffirmed appointments made to the sidewalk committee. And that sums it up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. And moving on to October monthly activity report for Board of Trustees. Okay.
At the last city meeting, they did a proclamation recognizing Indigenous Peoples Day. They sang a song, and it was really nice. It would be a good watch. I love that.
I was gonna say, I think
Oh, I'm so sorry.
this is Mark, right?
Oh.
Yeah,
The
we're-
October monthly
That's just
activity report.
yeah,
Just
contained in
what
your
was-
packet
yep,
each
just
month
what was in there.
for your information.
Okay, I just didn't know if you needed, okay,
Yeah, again, it was very thorough, and
okay, yeah,
I was impressed with what gets done in the course of a month around here.
yeah. Okay,
You want me to finish?
now we can,
I'm
yeah,
so
now
sorry.
we can finish, sorry.
I was jumping ahead.
That's okay.
Presentation by McKenna and Associates for the 2050 master plan. They did. It's a big one. They did a public hearing on the neighborhood enterprise zone for the certificate for the property on 410 West Broadway, and they approved that. They approved, well, had a public hearing on the application for commercial facility exemption certificate for that same property, and they approved that. They held a public hearing on the recommended rezoning request for the McGurk subdivision, approved that. They approved and held a public hearing for a couple of text changes. Oh, 3 text changes. And then they appointed the city commissioner, for the special committee for the, I didn't write the terms down, or the aquatic
The Aquatic Center.
is for, Mayor Joseph will be the person on that. Thank you.
Right.
Okay, for the, mine would be for the Saginaw Chippewa Indian Tribe. Just wanted to get back to last meeting, because there was some misinformation that was being spoken regarding the cost and the contributions made on the pathway that is over by CMU. This would be the pathway that goes from Denison, or Three Leafs and Denison, over to the baseball field. And you probably read the article in the paper, too. I think, Tim, you had sent that article, how the tribe was talking about the safety issues, and these are the types of programs that they like to really collaborate on, that type of thing. But anyway, and I've heard this also in the community as well, where people have spoken about the cost was like $210,000, and, you know, why is a township paying that much money for, you know, that type of thing? Those figures aren't right, so I wanted to correct that both for the public and for the board tonight as well. The actual cost for that pathway was $222,840. And that was divided among 4 entities. So again, what the tribe is always looking for is issues of safety, usability, accessibility, and also in terms of collaboration. So CMU, of that $222,840, CMU contributed $52,680 towards the pathway. The tribe's 2% contribution to the township for that, or for that entity, was $150,000. The tribe contribute to that. The city put in $5,800, and our share for the township was $14,360. The number that's been floating around in the community is that the township spent $210,000, and it was also disseminated in our last meeting by a board member, for this particular enterprise. The township spent $14,360, and it was divided among those entities, just so we have that for public record and for yourselves as well. The other thing I just wanted to indicate was I did bring up the meeting, I think it was last meeting, in which I spoke about the different projects that I had spoken with the tribe about for our for the spring allocation for the 2%. And the reason I brought it up then, as I said at the meeting, was that sometimes we're waiting too late to get our projects together, because, you know, you need engineering, you need to look at feasibility, cost studies, we're looking for collaboration, et cetera. So what I'd like to suggest is that, again, that maybe the next meeting or so, that we can begin to maybe finalize the projects that we'd be interested in. so that we could maybe then direct management to, because there would have to be engineering costs, who would be collaborating with this, or their grants, what part of this would be for the 2%, so we can maybe look at some of those projects. And there's three in mind that I have, but I'll talk about that more at the next meeting, so that we can move ahead with this and, make better use of the monies that are available, and for us to make better use of it for our community as well, for the residents. Okay, that's it for tonight.
Thanks for that clarification.
Thanks.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I attended a couple meetings. The first one was the evening of October 15th. I attended the Isabella County Board of Commissioners meeting. And a couple of things that went on there was a joyful announcement that the county is debt-free as far as money owed on buildings.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think that might have made the local rag today or
Yes,
yesterday.
today.
And some other information in regards to that there was discussion on. The county utilized a building authority that would authorize the county to make payments on those buildings. And they would be turned over, the way I understood it, to the county from the board authority. They're debt-free. I think the discussion is that board authority is going to disappear. There was not a comfort level with the current commission to have that continue to be the structure for that. Veteran Affairs Committee unanimously voted Susan Garrett onto that committee. The board members voted her on. There was a renewed agreement with the Extension Services, MSU Extension Services, in the amount of $161,743, continuing on with the programs that they work with, generally agricultural type programs and 4-H programs. There was a resolution passed to have the ability to bypass Public Act 152, and that has to do with contributions for employee medical expenses for governmental and school employees. So the county instituted to not follow Act 152. Also mentioned were there are 27 properties that have delinquent water bills, which potentially could be up for foreclosure. And the board accepted and placed on file the Isabella County Drain Commissioner's 2019 annual report. So those were some of the doings at the county. Also attended October 16th, the Michigan Township Association Isabella County Chapter meeting. That's where all the townships in the county get together and go over a number of things. Presenters that night were Road Commission Supervisor Tony Casales and Robert Walton of Isabella Township. But there was a lot of conversation that went on in regards to the road side of things. 2019 was, in Tony's mind, the busiest year they've had in his tenure. And he indicated they did chip seals on about 50 miles of road, crack seal on 43 or 63 miles of road, graveled 45 miles of road. Put about $1 million into maintenance, which would be like ditch clearing and those type of maintenance issues, not really the building of the roads. And also $1.5 million in winter care, salting, brining, sanding. Also mentioned that they purchased a shoulder gravel machine, which is a nice feature. You build a nice road, you want to have a nice shoulder so things don't get broken off, and they won't need to contract that portion out. And then this group has been going through presentations by group members to tell the group about each position of the board, like clerk, treasurer, trustees, supervisor. And so Bob Walton of Isabella Township gave, as a trustee, presented to the group what the responsibilities of a trustee are. And that's what took place at the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's kind of neat.
All right. Anybody else?
Okay, the road commission meeting on October 10th. There's another one tomorrow night, but on October 10th, I went to that meeting. Tim had mentioned something at our last meeting about signage on Meridian Road, where you crest the hill for the new bridge. And Tim asked me if I'd ask the road commission about some kind of signage. They said that if we're looking to get some kind of a sign that indicates that there's a bus stop ahead, or a stop sign ahead, for buses, we need to get in touch with the Mount Pleasant Public Schools and request that, and then they get in touch with the road commission. So I told Tim that I'd call the schools, but I didn't. I'm sorry. I called you the next day, but I don't really know if that's my responsibility to do that, so maybe Jennifer.
I did talk to Tony at this meeting where he was speaking, and he indicated they have a sign shop. He thought,
They were just
good
gonna-
idea. He'll be in touch with Mr. Daphne, and they'll be working.
All right, so we don't have to get in touch
Their
with the schools.
thoughts,
All right, Pickard Road's open. They approved a brine contract to purchase brine from a saltwater storage site that they have. They were talking about after the last big rain that we had, there were a lot of gravel roads that needed to be repaired. There was some heavy damage done to them. So that cost them a little bit to get that taken care of. Also, in relation to that, there was no crushed concrete available anywhere. So they said that when they tear their old building down, they'll be able to replenish their crushed concrete supply. That should make them satisfied for a while. They talked about when they do build, this one thing that I thought was pretty cool, about when they build their new building, they're gonna park, just say truck number 1 will be parked in spot number 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way like that, instead of just whoever gets there parks their truck wherever they get a chance to park. They said that that'll help with maintenance, because then they'll be able to look under the truck when the truck's back out. Oh, truck number 3 has got a oil leak, it looks like a hydraulic leak, so then a mechanic can look at that instead of having a chance for it to break down further. They'll be able to detect problems sooner. They have a couple of long-term employees that are retiring here at the end of the month of November. And they were looking forward to a payment of $500,000 from Apex Wind Energy that was due Friday, the 18th. And I would assume they got it because it looks like progress is still going on. Nothing was in the papers or anything. They said that they had the authority to shut them down if they didn't make their payment, so they must have gotten their payment. So, anyways, that's all I have.
All right, and I didn't have any sidewalks and pathways prioritization committee meeting. Our next one is November 4th, so, yeah, that there. So that moves us on to consent agenda.
I'll make a motion, we approve the consent agenda.
Support.
All right, discussion?
Can we just have a brief discussion on the IT service renewal?
Okay.
Page
So
41.
Jean-
I don't know if you want to pull that out or.
I'd just pull
Yeah,
it out because
I
I
was
have a
gonna say-
question.
All right, so,
Hold on a second.
Page 41.
So you wanted to do
the
that now
motion-
versus?
I was gonna say, do we need a motion to pull that out then, to discuss it?
To pull it out of the consent agenda?
I don't
Oh.
think you need a motion, you just pull it out and it gets added on as an item.
All right,
Just move it as A, or, well, motion to move it as A and bump everything down.
Just to put a finer point on it, as we've developed the use of the consent agenda, the purpose is so that if a board member does want to discuss one of those items, then really the best way to do that, because you've approved your agenda with that in the consent agenda already. And if you want to have that discussion, because the consent agenda normally doesn't include discussion, I think in the future you should try to police and monitor yourself and pull those items out when you approve the agenda.
Okay.
And then you want to, it's come up a couple times in the past, and if you want to be consistent amongst yourselves, then,
okay.
but I know trustee Melky was not here when
No.
we brought in
perfect
the
sense, though.
use of the consent agenda. And so be happy to answer any questions anybody may have.
Okay. So the motion, you,
No, just answer them, just ask a question, mine's just a little question.
I don't think mine will take long, but I'm fine with it being a
Is it
business
okay?
item or.
Or no? What do you want to
Lisa
do?
made a motion, I seconded it.
I was
It's
gonna say,
become item
she
one
made
under
an-
new business.
yep.
Item
Okay,
eight
do
under
that.
new business.
yep, item
Everything
A
else
and
is
and everything
approved.
else gets moved down.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Is that okay with? All right.
Good.
So, I guess, all in favor, because there's a motion and support. Any discussion other than that? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. So that will get moved down to new business. Then I guess, do we need to go back to consent agenda to,
But we didn't, did we,
because we need
We
to
should have-
actually,
we should have
we
to
should have
approve
actually, we should have
consent
actually
agenda.
voted on that one first.
correct.
So, I guess you made a motion. you
Bill made the
supported, right?
motion.
Or Bill made the
and I
motion, you supported,
it
sorry.
For the
Yep.
approval of the consent agenda.
Yep, sorry. Any more discussion on consent? All right,
Who went
Oh.
over everything, just ask.
yeah, who,
Who went over everything? Whose responsibility
Okay,
was
well-
it?
I was gonna
Nobody.
say, was that?
No, I did
Brian's?
last.
Your month.
Seriously? I'll stay after.
I didn't think, you-
No, I didn't.
Sorry about that.
My apologies.
Okay, all right.
It's good to see that you're human. I like that.
Let's take it back.
I did look over it as I was signing, so there's
Okay.
that, but, all right, so,
I knew that, I just had forgotten my
Right.
bad.
all in favor of approving the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that brings us to new business with the new A, which is the managed IT service renewal.
Well, since
Discussion.
I brought it up, I'll start. Obviously, there's a couple other comments. All I really wanted to say, and I asked Mark about this last night, it's an expensive ticket item. And not that I think it's an unfair proposal, because per industry standards, I think what the proposal was reasonable from a monetary standpoint and for the services that are described in there. What my concern had more to do with is, my understanding is that this board has pegged CMS as what I term, I guess, preferred vendor, so it doesn't have to go out for bid. And 3 years is a long time. I would like the board to reconsider and just see if in the future that might be something that we take competitive bids on. Part of the purpose of that is to, one, you get to explore what else is out there, but two, kind of keeps them honest, right?
yeah.
So
agree.
that's why I wanted to bring it out, was to articulate that.
Those are good points.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay,
My question is on page 55. I just don't know if this is like a regular thing or not. It says that oh wait, hold on. About the fiber optic cable. So they own 6 strands of the fiber optic cable, like, they will always own that forever, or like, I don't understand that. I don't know anything about the fiber optic cable. Like where it says ownership and then
I
it
forget
says
exactly.
Down at maintenance and
They
repairs.
put in fiber.
Okay,
We paid a lot of money, I think, to have maybe a couple of fibers,
6
six
strands
fibers for
out
us.
of a large trunk line, right? There's 100 and some usually or whatever in the trunk.
so we paid for that, we don't own it, they own it? Or is that, am I reading it wrong?
What line are you
We're on
on?
55.
On ownership?
Maintenance.
Like where it says 6, maybe I'm just
Oh,
reading it
ownership,
wrong.
okay.
If I may.
Yeah.
The,
It says exclusive use of the remaining strands, right? So how I interpret it is it says, there's a trunk line that's going to the plant. Union Township owns 6 of those strands. The remaining strands are ownership of CMS in that case. That's how I read it.
I'm not
Mark.
sure if you're answering the
I was
clerk's
trying to-
question or not,
Based
or
on
if you'd
my
like me
interpretation.
to, or however, I don't know who you're directing
Either
your
way.
question to.
Okay. Mark, did you have anything to add? You can go.
We're the client, so it indicates the client owns those 6 strands. And this is referencing back to Exhibit A in the document that is a agreement regarding fiber optic that was executed by the township back in 2014. And in the conduit, there is fiber that's owned by multiple entities, and we have exclusive use of those 6 strands.
Okay.
I believe you were referring to Section 1, the ownership.
Right.
Yeah. Is that like,
It says the
I
client.
mean, that's like a
will
regular
hold
thing,
clear-
though. People share their fiber optics, correct?
Hmm?
I mean, people share the fiber optics. Is that like a security thing or no? I mean,
We have exclusive use of those 6 strands. There are other fiber strands within the conduit that also exist, say, next to ours.
okay. So I did bring it. Just didn't understand that, so I wanted to ask.
Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
I guess in review of the contract, the project timetable, page 42 of the package, or page 2 of the contract. It's written out a little interesting in the way, in the terms I've seen in the past. Essentially saying we have a 3-year contract. It's worded as 36-month with automatic renewals on month-to-month basis. I guess I would, it's not out of line by any means, a 3-year contract. And they, I would tend to suggest a 1-year contract with 2 1-year renewals. I don't know if that would impact, that annual pricing. It may. So I'm not in tune to all the things that could be affected by what went into how they laid out the project timetable, but it's interesting verbiage to me, 36 months with month-to-month renewals,
If I may.
please.
So this item is there's 3 agreements involved. There's a master service agreement, there's a managed IT statement of work agreement, and there's a fiber optic statement of work agreement. Those are the 3 that you're looking to approve tonight. Those three have existed for the last 2 years. In 2017, the fall of 2017, I believe that's when it was. We entered into a similar agreement. At the time, it was for 2 years. It expires at the end of this month. And then in negotiations with CMS, the administration's been very pleased with that service, as you may recall. Before we had this agreement, we had an arrangement where it was basically break fix. We had no formal agreement with CMS. They were kind enough to give us some attention when needed, but there was no agreement that required that attention. And then also, of course, there was nothing that, not much that we were doing internally to be proactive to manage the IT function. So at the time, we debated whether or not to stand up our own IT function with our own W-2 employees or contract this out. It was brought to the board. It was approved for a 2-year agreement. And this renewal, the administration's recommending that we renew again with CMS. There was some negotiation that was done regarding to price, and the price that's before you now is slightly lower than their original pricing. And the administration was the one that asked for the 3-year renewal. This is time consuming to renew and process these sort of things. It's not unheard of that these type of agreements are a little longer in nature than a lot of your other agreements. You may recall the auditors, we've been using that same firm for a number of years. And there's a reason for that. There's a cost to stand up new firms and transitions and all that. And that applies to this type of arrangement as well. We've had a multi-year agreement with the city township attorney for many of the same reasons. They become familiar with our operation and our cases, and again, there's a cost to transition. It does make sense to occasionally rebid these kind of things, but our recommendation is that this agreement, which is expiring, that we're not recommending that we rebid that this time. And because of the cost of going through this, and we got a little better price for going 3 years versus 2, that's why the recommendation's before you tonight as it sits.
Mark, how does it get, and it could be cumbersome and maybe it's very clear, but your fiber gets cut. We own 6 pieces of glass. I don't know if CMS or some other entity truly owns the cable, the requirements for maintenance and repair of it. If you can shed light, I mean, if...
We had a fiber cut just earlier this week, I believe it was earlier this week. And it was done by a contractor working out on Deerfield Road. They cut our fiber and some others that were all the ones that were in the conduit. And in that particular case, since it was marked by misdig, and that's what we pay for primarily in the fiber service agreement, is for them to mark the cable. The contractor in that case was paid for the repair. It did not affect our operations that day because of the way that the board and prior administrations in their foresight constructed the cable in a double loop or redundancy, whatever technically if you want to call it. We were able to not see any immediate degradation from that cut. We still had access to all our alarms and at our pump stations and whatnot. And, but they do get cut, just like a water line or gas line can get cut.
So I was just thinking, say there's, in that conduit, 3 owners of fiber, and if we had one service provider, and the other folks utilized some other cable splicer. You know, how would that go? But I didn't even think about glass going off into separate conduits away from the main group of 144, say. And there's only maybe 24 fibers in this conduit.
The fiber optic plant statement of work, that portion of this whole package is only a couple $1,000s of the $57,000 contract. The main benefit of this is the proactive service that we're able to receive vis-a-vis our network and our workstations that are on everybody's desks, and all that comes with that. We have what amounts to an IT director assigned to us from CMS, referred to as a virtual department director, but back to some of the questions earlier. So that's who we interface with when we have contract administration issues or service issues. We meet with that individual quarterly. I meet with that individual quarterly. And then we also bring that individual in once a quarter also to attend our staff meetings so they can hear from staff. And they're the ones that put together the 5-year hardware replacement plan that Trustee Melke referenced earlier.
So
They
if we went
function
down-
as a practical matter as a internal IT department.
So I don't really know who has ownership of the cable. We own 6 strands, but say we did end up going with a different service provider. Does that impact our fiber? I mean,
I don't
we still
think
have
so.
ownership.
That's kind of what I was asking, or that's what I was worried about.
No.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more discussion? All right, because we pulled it out of consent agenda, do we need to actually make a motion to
Yeah.
approve this
Yes.
then? Okay, so is there a motion that anybody wants to make?
I'd make a motion for approval to renew the master service agreement, managed IT services statement of work, and the fiber optic cable plan statement of work. Collectively, the agreements with CMS Inter.net LLC, and authorized our township manager to execute said agreements.
I'll support it.
Motion and support. Any more discussion? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And it passes. Okay,
Thank you.
which takes us on to classification and compensation study. Board discussion.
So just a little bit of background, this study that we had done was originally presented by the consultant back in July of 2019, and they went over the content of the study. We had additional discussion about it in a closed session in August, and then what we have tonight is an opportunity for the board to discuss it in additional detail.
Are we just doing the employees tonight with the, possibly we need to also look at total totality in terms of the elected officials, various boards, so we're going to separate that out, or?
My thoughts on it are that we wouldn't do the elected officials tonight because we're not a full board. It'd be helpful to have the
Yeah.
entire board
Okay.
here for that.
Okay, so then we're going to be concentrating then, tonight's discussion will be on the staff, salaried staff. Correct?
Well, it says discussion action, whether there's any action taken, I don't know, there's certainly discussion that can take place. And we have our collective bargaining agreement due this year, which you'll be thinking about that as we do our discussion. But then we also have, under the new item C, we'll be looking at our manager's compensation package and contract. So they're separate items, but they kind of blend together, but certainly a tool that has been discussed by this board that we wanted to have opportunity to talk about again.
Right. I'd like to address, so there was a comparison made with nine other municipalities, looking at costs, looking at both in terms of their salaries, their vacation time, benefits, health care, retirement, the whole shebang. And they also then looked at, the thing that jumped out to me were that there are some positions typically across the board were in line with that comparative analysis, so to speak, with the other municipalities. But there are three, what they call the green positions being that they are considerably underpaid relative to the average of the cohort. And there were 4 that are red, which means that they're overpaid relative to the average. So one thing that I would like to maybe have throw up for discussion is that I think it's important to bring the 3 green positions, which would be skilled labor, building clerk, and administrative assistant, to bring them up closer up to that average. And one of the ways that when this is being presented to us by the person who did the evaluation, suggested that we might look, as we're looking at various levels of steps, thank you. As we're looking at various steps, that what we may want to do is get these green positions into a step that's more relative to their experience and to their time served and education or whatever, so that they're starting off at a more equal footing relative to the cohort group and in terms of others are working here on staff. So my suggestion would be is that we look at those 3 green positions and that we consider looking at the steps, how we can put them into a step that then is more suitable to their experience to get their wage more commensurable with what the average is. And with the red, we may look at, I'm not going to take money away from folks, but perhaps with the red is that when we do the bargaining, maybe in the red, for the red positions, perhaps look at how to maybe you're giving maybe keeping at a cost of living adjustment, but you're not going to be indexing them higher up so that we can try to get them to be closer in line to what again is the average salaries. So those are 2 things that I think that would be important to look at, bringing the green folks up, and bringing the red positions in line. And the way to keep it in line would be is to just give the COLA as the adjustment for the salary increase. You're not bumping them up, like, say, if you're giving 5%, you're staying in the COLA, so the others would get the 5%, so you begin to balance it out a little bit. So those are just some suggestions that I have regarding looking at this.
But if we go cost of living for everyone, then how does that, it's not fair to the others if everybody gets cost of living
Correct.
for the ones that are, if you look on it's Exhibit 2, page 3, to bring those employees up, It would be an increase of 27,534.
For the 3 green positions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, there's 6 that it names on here, but 3 of them are skilled labor positions, so they're all basically the same. So I wonder if we made a motion to bring those positions up immediately, and then if there is a cost of living increase, if we just go cost of living, then it'd be fair for them.
Yeah.
But-
Let's see.
I don't,
I need to
yeah.
address a couple things, I
We
think.
can't just bump it.
So we received the compensation and classification study, and it showed a couple things, broadly speaking. That when you look at the organization as a total, we were a bit underpaying our employees per the market. And I believe it was 3% in total. And then they also looked at the benefits, and there were 14 comparables that were used, and depending on which benefit you were looking at, we were a little bit behind, a couple we were a little bit above. And the important thing to remember is that when we talk about implementing this study, that in the main, almost all of these items are going to be subject to negotiation by rule, by law. And so you can't just decide to increase any of these positions on Exhibit 2 because it's by law subject to negotiation. It's a subject of collective bargaining. All these positions exist within a bargaining group. And that's why we had the closed session back in August. And what I took away from that was, generally speaking, that we were going to, as best we can through negotiation, attempt to implement this study, and that this was going to be our anchor, if you will. And then the trick becomes, how do you do that? And that's where the negotiation comes in. And the other thing that I took away from the meeting in August was that the board was comfortable with a 8 pay grade system, should be top to bottom, and with a 9-step system, which is left to right. And so then some of the challenges when you go to implement something like this, because you're sitting now with the whole organization of employees that exist in different places relative to that matrix. And a couple things that are important are maintaining internal equity in terms of if there's 2 people in the same classification or the same pay, same grade, and one's been here 7 years and one's been here 2 years, I think the organization from an internal equity point of view wants to maintain that space. And so the person that's been here 7 years might end up at the 7th step of the new matrix. The person that's 2 would end up at the 2nd place. And then you have things like the red and the green circled employees. And if you treat the green circled employees similar to what I just described, find out where they should exist on the matrix based on years of experience, keeping spread and space for internal equity purposes, they'll end up on the matrix where we want them to be if our goal is to implement a study, because we think it's a fair analysis of the market for these positions. Then that individual will just happen to get a bigger raise in year 1 than another person. They've both gotten the raises, but if you look at it from a percentage point of view or a pure dollar point of view, they're different amounts. So year one of implementation of something like this gets a little bit squirrely. It's not like everybody, if the distance between steps is always 2.5%, for instance, and COLA was 1%, well, everybody with an additional year of service moved up a step, which was 2.5%, maybe more than they were before, plus the whole matrix moved up because of COLA, 1%. So everybody got the same amount of percentage increase, but you're not going to find that in year one when you're trying to implement something like that. And that's a nature of the beast. Having said all that, wages and benefits are, again, a subject of collective bargaining. And so what we're trying to do in the negotiations, and we haven't got there yet because we haven't dealt with negotiation or with economics, is using this study as an anchor, because the bargaining group may have something to say about all this.
Right.
So the red circled employees are going to be particularly difficult.
Yes.
We have many employees that have been here a long time, long tenured employees. They're already at the top of the old step matrix. They've been here way longer than 9 years. And if they're currently getting paid above the 9th step in a particular pay grade, you know, what do you do? And what you often see done, what you often see happen in these cases is that employees in those positions will, there's not a step 10, so there's nowhere to go from a step 10 perspective. The whole grid will move up,
And they're not.
and if you increase their base salary by the amount of that inflationary increase, then that position will never end up back inside the grid because you're increasing their base salary. So the way organizations often deal with that is they pay that amount as a lump sum. But they don't pay it, they don't increase the base wage in terms of the study, or in terms of the pay system that the organization has. So it's all those kind of machinations, and you can imagine how something like that might be, other people might have something to say about all that. And so, but that's going to be a tough one, is with the red circled employees.
Right.
The green are a little easier. It costs a little bit more money because you got to get them into the
Right.
place to begin with. Theoretically, you can then save a little bit of money by how you're handling the red circled employees, but the whole concept of steps is to reward years of experience, but there's got to be an end spot, and you often see 9 and 10 year steps. And then the idea is, if you come into a position at step 1, you go through, you get to step 10 or 9, rather than the organization creating steps 10, 11, and 12, the organization is maybe wanting you to transition into a higher pay grade job, or go find work somewhere else. So there are non-bargain unit positions that exist in the organization that we don't have to worry about bargaining with them. So you might want to have some policy discussion regarding those positions. And again, you got to keep in mind the effect it's going to have on your workforce and all that. But that's how we're handling this study right now.
So I think everybody would like to be at the top of their pay grade, you know,
Yeah.
why won't you? But realizing you've hit the top of your pay grade.
Right.
Yeah. Or have moved up in, you know, a higher grade, a higher position, a more complicated position, complex position. So it's really a sound structure.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I like what's being offered, what's been suggested in here with the steps and, you know, and taking care of folks and things like that. I think it's,
Your governance policy documents, and I forget which policy it is, although I probably got it right here. 2.3. And that's titled Compensation and Benefits. And one of the emphasis, there's always an ability to pay, and there's always the fiscal constraint that you have to address, but one of the statements is that there shall not be established current and compensation benefits which deviate materially from the geographic and professional market. So the board, through its policy, has said we want to be competitive so we can recruit and retain. And you've been explicit about that. And we had this study done to see where, and these studies should be done every 7 to 10 years. And you had one done in 2010, I believe.
So the board might want to talk about that policy and maybe even identify what significant means. You know, that's fairly vague.
good
to-
point.
To tighten things up.
I had numerous jobs where your wage is like capped once you hit a certain level. So, I mean, you can cap it if they're making $10,000-$20,000 more than what they should be, you know? There's always capping it. So,
But we did a geographic study to similar likes, but every position isn't necessarily like the other 14 groups you studied. There could be some
Right.
reasons or some requirements or some special knowledge that we have placed on that takes them a little bit out of what has been compared to. So there's that sort of thing to look at too, especially for a red circle type person.
Right.
Is where that
Right.
would maybe be helpful.
I've seen strategies that involved, okay, see, in this particular case, we have 9 steps, 1, 2, 3, 4. In trying to implement things like this, we've seen, in order to make it affordable to create a step 10, because some organization had a lot of people at the top step, they created step 1.5, 2.5, 3.5. So folks didn't move from 2 to 3, they moved from 2 to 2.5, which is cheaper, which freed up money to pay to create a step 10 if the organization was uncomfortable with, or the negotiation or such that, you know, folks that were at the top of the range,
then you'd be in top 10
when
people.
others were getting a step increase and a COLA, they were only getting a COLA, and it wasn't building into their base wage, it was being paid lump sum. Still the same amount of money, but, so there are some ways to try to address the uniqueness that each organization has. But I think the most important message that I want to repeat is, coming out of that closed session, I got some direction that I'm moving with. And I know, Brian, you don't know what that is.
No. I'm speculating right
Sorry, I
now.
don't know what the direction is there.
I
And
can
you
call
don't
you
need to bring it
tomorrow.
up, I know that it can't be, so.
And then, as Mark had mentioned, you know, we do have some non-bargained people.
Correct.
That would be worth some discussion, probably. Not that I can necessarily even tell you what that position is.
And you also might want to have some discussion on, I recall back in 2017, we did a study of sorts, because the question was, are we paying our folks that are appointed to the boards and commissions appropriately? Planning commissions, ZBA,
Right.
that kind of thing. And the conclusion after that effort and the review of that data was the board passed a motion that the pay per diem was okay the way it was. There was a couple board members that wanted to see it increase, but there was discussion and a vote, and it didn't change. And you know, you have data in here, it's the last 2 pages of the book, that I think kind of come to the same conclusion. Some are paid more, some are less, but
Yes.
I didn't see anything really standing out that caused me to say, you know, something needed to change there.
So then really, we've given you just direction as you move into negotiations.
Right.
So, I believe there, unless we had some change of direction, we virtually told the manager how to move forward
Right.
with the negotiated people.
Yeah, and I think just in terms of equity, equality, it's trying to see somehow at least getting those green positions, and I understand that's all part of the
That was part of the
negotiation.
discussion.
Yeah, and that was part of the discussion. Are you asking, so did you give, do you want on the agenda then for the next meeting to be looking at the same study again relative to the elected officials and our respective boards as well? Is that what we're going to do? I mean, that's what I heard before. Is that correct? That we're going to follow up on this next meeting to review elected officials' salaries and also the
Boards and commissions.
the boards and commissions as well, based on this as well. So why don't we have Mark put that on the agenda for the next meeting? Is everyone in agreement with that? Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Good suggestion.
Very good.
So, question if I may,
Sure.
being that I wasn't in that closed door, I think I can ask this. What I heard was that direction was given for the manager to negotiate bargain positions, or was it inclusive of non-bargain positions as well?
No.
Just the bargaining, I believe.
Pardon.
So we've not addressed that then?
Correct.
Thank you.
Correct.
Yeah.
So that'll be next.
Yeah, that's what it'd be the
I need
next.
kind of a follow-up on that too, because I don't know
Yeah.
anyways.
Yeah.
So,
So we'll have that
So
on
you
the,
follow.
on the docket for our agenda for the next meeting.
Can I ask a request then? I have a feeling for which positions those are, but could you enumerate those?
I'm
for-
sorry.
The non-bargain positions, would you be willing to enumerate what those positions are?
Yeah, the non-bargaining unit positions that exist in the organization are the township manager, the township assessor, the finance director, the public services department director, although it's unfilled, the community and economic development director position, And then all other positions, with the exception of what I'll call seasonal part-time, or
Yep.
even the permanent part-time, so we have some of those.
I probably would
They're
have guessed.
not part of the bargaining group, but all the other positions are.
But anyone can opt out of it if they want.
They can opt out of paying dues, but they cannot opt out of the union.
Agreement.
But they don't have to pay dues. And we had, in the past, a member or two that did not pay the dues.
So-
But they were, the position was still in the bargaining unit. The individual had the freedom to elect not to pay dues if they so chose to the bargaining group.
They'd still be represented though.
They were still represented, they were still subject in all respects to the bargaining, to the contract. Pay, discipline, grievance procedure, the whole ball of wax.
So I believe there's currently a part-time position underneath finance director. That is that, did you consider that a seasonal or that part-time?
That's a part-time,
Okay, and that is not bargain.
correct.
And that's one of the ones that you're,
That's a non-bargaining unit position. And it's only temps generally included in this study.
yeah, and my understanding is the position that you're identifying to assist the finance director would be underneath is to make that a full-time position. And that
The accounting
part-time-
specialist would be a,
Full-time, and that wouldn't be the need for that part-time.
right, the accounting specialist, in my analysis, I've determined that that the type of work would place it in the bargaining group.
Yep. And replace then the part-time that's there in that support role currently.
I didn't catch the last part of
The,
it.
that position would replace the part-time position that's currently there assisting the finance director.
Right.
Thank you.
Any further discussion?
I guess that would apply also to the tax specialist position that's three-quarter time budgeted.
That position is part of the bargaining group, and it just happens to be budgeted for 3/4 of the year because we don't think we'll spend money on that position for the full year. But it's still part of the bargaining group, and that position is listed in this. It's a grade 2 position, I think.
In
Might
another
be
year
grade
down the
3.
road or so, it would be a full-time position.
Correct.
Yeah. And if something changes between now and then, it could very well come back. We have to adjust the budget, but it's an authorized 1 FTE position.
Any more? All right. No more discussion on that, then we will move on to manager 2020 employment contract compensation changes.
So this is in front of you tonight because the employment agreement that exists between myself and the township is, there's a section that is labeled compensation, and it indicates that, a couple things the contract indicates. It renews every January 1 automatically unless either party decides not to renew it, and there's certain notification requirements that go along with that if there's going to be non-renewal by either party. And then there's a compensation section that says that annually there'll be at least discussion between the parties as to the following year's compensation benefit package. Also, your governance policy 4.5 says that every year you'll take a look at the compensation and benefits and have this discussion. So that's why it's here.
Seems to me in the past, we've gone through this a couple of times anyways with Mark. And upon his request, he's had requested very minimal increases. If I recall, we might have, and correct me if I'm wrong for sure, we might have did a lump sum of
1,000.
a relatively small amount at one point in time, as opposed to adding it to a base salary. But increases have been below cost of living adjustments, basically, over the course of time, as far as I recall. I believe Mark's doing a terrific job. The study comes back to us, and the township manager was studied, and he is right at the median range level. And from my perspective, I would be looking to give our manager an increase for 2020, the year 2020, is what I'm thinking. Just a quick number.
Do we know offhand what the COLA is projected? I think it's about 2.8, is that?
2.8 is what I read today.
But we don't go necessarily by the COLA, we go by something else, a mid-western,
Well, the county gave it 2.5.
okay.
Based on, do you know?
I talked to Jim Horton today and Steve Pickens, and they both said that what the county did. I mean, I don't know if if the state of Michigan is 2.5, they never explained that. I looked that up too. And I said projected COLAs for 2020. And then it went by state, and I don't know, I couldn't find anything where it broke it down to where it said like a 2.3, or like for Alabama, a 2.3, or Michigan, a 2.5, you know. It just said 2.8. And they didn't explain to me why they said 2.5, but
Well, I agree with Tim that I think Mark's done a terrific job. I think that, certainly as a township, we have benefited, certainly more organized. I think we're seeing the staffing and the needs of the community are certainly being addressed. I think we've all been very satisfied. We get these monthly reports, which just the amount of work and the volume, what the folks do here is just pretty impressive, to say the least. I think in the past we've done minimum in terms of the increases. We stayed within the COLA range. I think one year it was just $1,000 increase, Tim, if I recall. The first year was, I think we raised it 1,000 or something, from 99 to 100. The salary is in line with the average in terms of the wage study as well. So that certainly has been we're not excessive in terms of what we're paying. It's the average of the other 9 municipalities that we compared it to, within a couple thousand. So it's right in line that way.
a 2.5 would be roughly a $2,600 raise.
You're basically getting $1,000 ballpark per percentage of raise.
Okay.
1%'s $1,040.
Right, yeah. So what are people thinking in terms of what fields?
What comes to my mind as a starting point would be a 5% raise. which is gonna be 5,000, 5,200, somewhere about there. That's just a talking point.
Yeah,
In the past, Mark has offered feedback for whatever reason he would take to
yeah.
indicate maybe a number that would
That's a-
satisfy him, and it's always been a number below what the board has felt appropriate.
Right. I think in the past, one of Mark's rationale was also having to do with going into the collective bargaining and making sure that, you know, he's in a position to bargain appropriately. So I think part of what he was sort of, I think, indicating to us is that as we deal with him, that becomes somewhat of a template for what others are going to be looking for, or standard that they'll be looking for. So I think that's where he's been wanting to be careful too.
I think that's to be cognizant of that as well, just shows the maturity and understanding of
I agree.
our managers.
I agree.
It's simply great.
Yeah, I agree. So,
I would agree to the cost of living, but I wouldn't go much over that just because he's gonna get higher than his average in here. If you do it 5%, 5%, 5%, 5%, he'll get way above the chart.
so you're seeing that
But
that,
COLA, I would do that, but in the future, I mean, if you kept doing a 5%, it's gonna go
Right.
way overboard.
Well, we don't know if we're gonna go with our bargaining units at 5% either. I really don't think we can. If we have a precedent of doing 5% every year,
Yeah.
That's quite a bit.
you know, we're gonna, everybody's gonna wanna quit the city and everywhere else and come to work here.
Might get some great people.
yeah, so that was an issue for us last time with the bargaining, that it was 5% and 5.5 or 4.5 and 5, depending on the group. So we did have some concerns regarding that. So part of what we have to be cognizant with is making sure that we're not going to make it more difficult for him to be able to do the bargaining based on us being, quote, excessive, which, and I'm not saying that even the 5 is excessive, but I'm just saying that would be the way it might be viewed. I don't know, Mark, if you want to chime in on this, and, you know, you've given some direction in the past, and I don't want to put you on the spot. If you're not comfortable doing that, that's fine too, but.
No, I'd be happy to add some input. In terms of the general workforce and being a competitive employer, the increases that you mentioned and that when you approved collective bargaining agreements 2 years ago, that for one of the units, I think it was a 5% increase, and another one was for 6%. And part of that, the rationale for that kind of number was because we introduced cost sharing on the health care, so we were taking money back as well. So the net was much less than those two numbers. Recall that we used to have 0% cost share on health care, and now we have 6%, and we're continuing to move that to a higher percent. So I offer that. The negotiation and the compensation that you have with any township manager, I don't know that you necessarily need to be too tied into with what you're doing with the rest of the workforce. It's a unique position. There's only one of them. Having said that, you're right in the contract that I initially came on board with was $99,000. I did not want too much of an increase because we were going into negotiations, so the $1,000, I think that was less than 1% or something. Last year, the board was kind enough, and I didn't ask for this much, but was kind enough to give me what amounted to about a 4.25% pay increase. So right now, I'm at about $104,000, and if you see in the compensation study, that's a couple $1,000s away from the average. So that's all background. And there's two things that I thought I would ask for. And there's been a couple numbers thrown out from you all. And what I'm more interested in is an additional week of vacation. And the value of that, based on my
Give it to him.
hourly rate, is a little over, is $2,005, or 1.92%. If you want to look at it in those terms, what it ends up amounting to is non-productive time, because it's an additional week of vacation. But if you want to try to put a dollar value on it, that's what it is. And then the other thing I was interested in is a car allowance, which again is outside of base wage. And I just threw down a number of $300 a month. That's worth $3,600 a year, or 3.45% of my pay. Again, it's not affecting the base wage. So those are the two things that I was coming in tonight that were kind of on my mind. And so that's the feedback.
What is your current level of vacation period?
4 weeks.
4 weeks. Those are important times. Hence your desire probably
And
for that.
I don't use all of them. You know, there's a few days or a week or so that gets carried over to the next,
Then why would you want more? In case?
in case. Because I find I'm having to manage that more than I care to.
It's interesting, you said the vacation, there was a survey, I don't know, maybe a couple months ago that I had come across, and they were talking about in negotiations with employees, if they offering either increased vacation time or increased salary, the majority went with the vacation time, because time is a premium nowadays. So, I mean, I think that I can certainly respect that, you know, for sure. So, I mean, it was pretty modest in terms of what is being asked for. So,
What I'm not sure of, and maybe Ms. Teal knows, but I think there's a cap on carryover of vacation. And so I would assume that I would be subject to those caps. So when you ask how much I have, and if I'm not using it all, if I hit certain caps, I'd lose it. I'm not asking to be exempt from that.
I would hope you would try to use your vacation.
Yeah.
Those are important to take.
I use most of it.
Okay. Refreshing for tomorrow is a good thing.
Interesting proposals. I didn't really jot down all the numbers Mark said, but it sounded to me like it was in the 5%.
Closer to
Right.
six.
It was, yeah,
It's
it
closer
was
to
extra
6.
week of vacation. I didn't get the
what was the
percentage on
vacation?
that.
What's the
But,
vacation number?
it was
I'll
like
help you.
$2,005 or something, which,
The combined value of the two,
Yeah, it comes to
Is-
$5,605, $605.
or 5.37%.
5.3. I would throw out that I would accept Mark's recommendation to us to hit what his desires are.
I think it's too much, I'm sorry.
I do too.
I
Margaret
think cost of
McAvoy,
living, you
the
could have the
county
week
administrator.
vacation, and then 1% with the week, or no, not even that. You can have a week in 3 days. How about that? Week in 2 days. Average it out so it's 2.67% or whatever, 2.6% cost of living
Our county administrator makes 89,000.
for the county.
She's got 230 employees under her.
Well, I'd make a motion to recommend our township manager's compensation package to include for the year 2020, no salary increase, a 5-day work week of vacation added to his current, and a $300 monthly car allowance.
I'll support that for discussion and see what we do with that. So we have a motion, Kim, and a support.
Yep. Yeah, I was just jotting down the numbers,
Yeah.
sorry. Okay, so up for discussion?
I have a question, I guess. Recap for me again, what's transpired over the last few years. It sounds like Mark took less increases than is
Yeah.
typical, with the exception of 1 year, is that correct?
The first,
The first year, it was $1,000.
$1,000. So that would be probably below cost of
It
living in
was,
that
I think,
case.
less
It
than
was
1%.
It was 1%.
Or about
and then
1%,
the next year
yeah.
is what, 4 or 5?
And then the next, after that, it was,
4.5.
yes, 4.5%
So 2 years.
increase.
5.5,
right.
which is cost of living for 2 years.
4.25.
4.25.
And what we're not doing in this, by not increasing the salary, that also affects, the Medicare, the Social Security, and all the other things. So when you look at all those expenses as well, we're saving on all that, plus the extra salary. So in that regard, then.
It's less.
It's less than even the 5.37, because he's not gaining on that end in terms of this. I mean,
That's
You're
true
not
on the
gonna pay-
car allowance as well, right?
So what he's asking for is a vacation for 1 week, an additional week vacation, which would cost, in terms of the current salary and stuff, would be $2,005 is the cost of that. And then he'd like a car allowance of $300 per month for the 12 months, which would be $3,600. So that's a grand total of $5,605. But when you also take out the Social Security, the things, he'd benefit more if we gave him a $5,000 increase, the 5% that you were talking about. He would benefit more from that, and it will cost us more than this is costing in terms of the, what you're contributing.
You'd be paying the MERS
Match.
contribution, Social
Correct.
Security contribution, Medicare contribution. all that.
I'm not sure as a organization if there's a benefit we'd realize doing a car allowance as opposed to a salary other than the other expenses we talked about. But, I'm not sure how write-offs and things work like that in government, but what I think, from my perspective, I'd say it's spot on. It is certainly not above anything I would recommend. And I think it's creative. I think it's a savings to the township ultimately, and is what he desires, and I don't think it's excessive at all, and is well thought out.
I don't know what other people feel about
Well,
it.
What happens next year and the year after that? Next thing you know, we got a township manager making $140,000 a year.
Let's hope so, and hopefully it's justifiable.
Is it
Well, with all
justifiable
the
that
new
the
heads,
public makes 2.8%, 2.5%? The public that's out there paying these bills? It's, sometime we've got to watch what we're doing here. I mean, we're spending other people's money.
And you got to think about the new heads that we're creating, which is making his job a little bit less
I don't know.
with the
I
heads.
don't.
Because they're going to report to the people report to him. So, I mean, it's,
I don't necessarily see that. I see it freeing up him to be more proactive, more creative, more taking our township to greater heights by freeing up some of those things. I look at it, this is a very professional position.
Oh, yeah.
And in comparison to, I am aware of many positions with lesser responsibility at our university down the street. That these numbers pale in comparison. Mark could walk out of here today and, teach government and civics and more lucrative things, finance and things like that. I don't think Mark is overpaid in the least. I think the township is very fortunate to have him at the price point we have him.
And the wage study does support what you're just saying right now, because it's within line of the other municipalities. I think what's important is, what would be better, what would feel better in terms of, if the car allowance were changed, were modified, say, 200 a month rather than the 300. What would make that more palatable in that regard for you guys
For
too?
me, you can make it 200 a month and then take out, make it in the contract saying that he can't do the mileage too, because not saying that he never does. I'm just saying if he wanted to, he could. So, he can go and do all the mileage and everything else and get the, double dip on that, you know what I'm saying?
$1,200.
With that coming to
But
light,
that's not saying he would, I'm just saying, and I'm just saying any person, I'm just saying you could.
and if that came to the light of the board, that's not gonna fly very well for
Right,
a
right.
manager.
He already is not,
You're not gonna fool around with nickels over something.
right, and he's already not putting in a mileage
I was
expense.
assuming.
Yeah, that's what I said
You're
that.
right.
Submit
And,
mileage
yeah,
reimbursement.
and the reality is that if you look at the.
But you've seen some of the mileage, it was a lot.
Well, the maximum range for a township manager at grade pay 8, and this wage study is $107,384.
And he's at 104.
What's that?
He's at 104, right? You said?
Right, but with this increase, you're talking
So you
$109,000.
bumped him out of the thing, maxed out.
Well, you're actually still talking about 104,000 too.
Correct.
Right, but still.
Yeah, I actually don't view
Um,
the vacation as,
Right.
it's
I don't.
compensation of a sort, but I don't view that as compensation from a salary perspective.
Correct.
I'm fine with just the vacation. We're spending other people's money, and that's just what gets me is, I think that I wasn't on the board when he was hired on.
100%.
But maybe there should have been a wage study done before he was hired on and saw what the average wage was. I think that the starting salary may have been too high years ago, but that's just my opinion. We gotta watch what we're doing around here. We keep doing this, and Norm, you mentioned 2 years ago, hiring on these other people, what the impact would be in the budget this year. And, luckily, we didn't hire them all on, but.
Well, I appreciate what you're saying, Bill, and from the, I think what we're trying to do is provide a compensation package which is commensurate with what we're getting quality-wise from Mark in terms of the work,
Well, I
okay?
understand that.
And if he were to, let's just go back to the mileage part of it, he could put in his mileage every month, and I would think that the mileage based at 52.5 cents a mile would exceed what he's really asking for. So, I agree with you, Brian, is that in terms of the vacation, that's not a cost per se for us, for the township. So it's not like it's $2,000 that we're losing in the
Right.
deal. It's time off, and I think that employees deserve time off. So in the mileage, he could do either way. So it's not a both. It's an either or. So he could put in the mileage each month if he so chose. And my sense is that would probably perhaps be more than what's being asked for. If the 300 feels too high, 250, 200, I mean, I don't know if we're just splitting hairs here and chopping up nickels, but, I think I would like to see the board be cohesive in terms of what we're, be in agreement completely and have consensus here for what we're deciding.
The vacation time, really, from how I've seen Mark stay in communication during vacation time,
Correct.
simply just allows him to be somewhere else. He's got his computer, he's corresponding, we're communicating. It doesn't reduce the workload that he's handling.
Yes.
And when you go on vacation, you know you're working to take care of that week. You're gonna be gone. You're always diligently working, so you're not gonna come back to something. I think the vacation time was so creative and so spot on and prudent for his benefit. It will continue to be for the township's benefit. And there's no cost increase. It allows him to do his job in the way that the younger folks want to operate. Remotely, opportunities to work, you know, whatever hour they choose. You're on vacation, you have a little freedom. I can sleep in, I'll be up burning the midnight oil, answering a question. I think it's just terrific, and he has been so non-committal. And you look at the 14 folks here and the mileage, how many do turn in mileage. I picked up on that when Mark had mentioned that he doesn't take mileage, and I thought that's something. And so I just think it's a fair compensation.
And if you're not looking at a week's vacation in terms of compensation, then what you're really giving is $300 would be $3,600, which would be, in a sense, 3.5% increase. So, I mean, it's deceiving when we say it's almost like a 5.5% increase with a vacation thrown in, but it isn't money that we're expending. And the fact that he's asking for it in this way doesn't increase the base salary, because the base salary increase would actually end up costing us more for the same amount. You know, when you throw in the things that need to be paid along with that.
Especially when you look at cost of living in
There's like
subsequent
paid-
years.
Paid vacation, so it is added in there, right?
Well, it is paid, but it's not like, it's his salary that he's getting already. So it's not like we're not giving him any more money than, he's getting 104. The extra vacation isn't any extra more money out of our pocket. He's still getting, he's just having some time off from work. But it's not costing us,
Non-productive time.
you know.
I actually-
I understand
don't-
I view vacation as a productivity tool.
Oh, I do
because
too, I do too.
We all need to refresh to be productive at work, and
Well, one of the, if I may, and I know there's a motion on the table, and this is board discussion, but
Go ahead.
we're also negotiating. What I don't want to see happen, and I think I've demonstrated this by my actions in the past, that there's enough out there that can create divisiveness amongst the members of this board. And I'm not particularly interested in adding to that through this process. There's enough other places where just by me having to do my job adds to divisiveness. Can't help that. So, you know, I mentioned what was on my mind. It doesn't need to be considered as cast in stone. And I don't really like to negotiate against myself, and I don't think I'm going to. And I understand there's a motion on the table. But, you know, the vacation time is important to me. And, you know, if there's a way y'all can figure out monthly car allowance that can work for all of you, I'm sure it would work for me. Whatever it is not going to be the amount of a monthly car payment, at least not the one I drive.
I think you
So-
make a good point. I don't feel that this should be divisive. I think that we should be unanimous in our decision. And so I guess what I'm looking for is consensus among us, how to do this in a fair and just way and have the consensus. And, and it's a reasonable offer when you look at what's being asked for, because it doesn't change, as I said, the base. Does it make different, would it be different if we decide, a different number in terms of what the car allowance should be? But like I said earlier, is that, if he were to put in his mileage each month, I think would far exceed what's being asked for here. So I think we're bargaining, or we're benefiting on both ends of this. As a vacation, it doesn't cost out any additional money for us, and it's a car expense that if we were to put in his reimbursements thing, he'd be getting more for it. So it doesn't change a whole lot. I guess I'd like to hear from everyone else in terms of how you feel about it. What would work?
I certainly hear Bill's concern. I don't disagree with it really at all, in the sense that we're spending our taxpayers' dollars here.
Yes.
And we have to take that very seriously, and I have no doubt that all of us do. I'm a big proponent of vacation, that's why I don't consider that compensation. I think that's an incentive to keep somebody happy in their job, aside from what you need to do to pay the bills. But I know the motion on the floor is for $300 with the car allowance. I certainly would entertain any variation of that. I think the vacation is the thing that I wouldn't want to budge on, because I think that's important. I think that's pays dividends back to the township, and it pays dividends, in this case, to the manager. But I do hear Bill's
agree.
concerns.
Yes.
And
And Bill's always prudent that way, and that's what I really respect in Bill. I really.
I mean, I'll agree to vacation. I think that's fine. But
that's true.
I mean,
I
if
think Bill's comment just, Bill?
I mean, we have vehicles that sit in the parking lot every day, township-owned vehicles that are paid for, that we don't, I see them, I come by here many times a week, and there's 2 or 3 vehicles out here all the time. I've never came by here and not seen a company vehicle out here, or a township vehicle. Sorry,
that's.
basically the same company, township, whatever.
I mean, I look at even if it was like 250 for the month, and then you do that times 12, that's 3,000, and that becomes a 3% raise. And if we're looking at a 2.8 as the kind of the cost of living,
Yeah.
that to me would be a reasonable offer. So it's costing us $3,000 basically in terms of a raise. And the vacation is just what it is, but it's no additional money that's coming out of pocket. He still would be getting that money if he's here or not here. So we're just giving him some extra time off.
Like I said, I talked to a couple people today from the county, and maybe I shouldn't be comparing the county with the city, or the township with the county, but when we've got a county administrator that just got a $2,000 raise to make $89,000, and this is something that I think that this board back in 2016 should have looked at, I mean, Mark said his starting salary was $99,000. Well, that's things that should have been looked at years ago.
Well, it is what it is, but again, we're not comparing apples and apples in terms of, different positions, administrator at the township or at the county level and Mark's position here. But I want to just correct myself. So if it was $250 a month and it's $3,000, 3,000, over the 104 is actually about a 2.8. So that's exactly in line with, so do you give we can give 2.8 2.8 in terms of an increase in the salary would end up costing us more and cost the taxpayers more than what's being asked for here, which is very reasonable, and it's costing everyone less, the township, the citizens, the taxes, et cetera. So I don't know if you would want to modify, your original motion, but would that be something that people feel comfortable with? Because again, I believe 3% over 104 is going to come to about a 2.8 something. You can calculate that out, Bill, and say.
Mark, can you tell me, you have all right to turn in mileage
Yes.
as an employee here?
Yeah. The only time I do is if I go on, I never turn in mileage when I'm going to meetings. If I remember to do it, and if I want to take the time to do it, and I know that's on me, I will submit mileage if I go to like Lansing, if I go somewhere kind of outside the immediate area.
Right.
But I don't do that all the time. I have every right to do it. I have every right to, when I go to City Hall, when I go to Isabella, record mileage. I'm not gonna record, I'm not gonna mess with that. I don't,
Right.
Time.
I don't have the time nor the inclination or the energy to keep a logbook. So that's why I don't do it.
Maybe, Bill, we could just have Mark pick up the mail, deliver the mail, because that's come up for mileage coming in from people. No, I'd like to keep my motion. I think it's very reasonable. It is appropriate.
Are you still seconding the motion then?
Well, like I said, I'd like, as Mark said, he doesn't want to see this be divisive.
Right.
Yeah,
He just asked you if you wanted to amend it, so I just wanted to make sure he.
yes. So
Okay.
we do have to vote on this.
Yeah.
But again, I think we want to look for consensus. So if another figure would be something that would work for people. But again, did you calculate out the 3%, $3,000?
Doesn't even matter.
Yeah, I think it's about 2.8 is what it's going to come to. That's the cost of living. So we can either give the straight cost of living, 2.8, and be done with it. That raises it close to 107. Or we do it this way, which is a lot cheaper for the taxpayers and for the township. And it's still, I think, this is pretty modest considering, what's being asked for and the services being provided, so.
I don't think the request is necessarily unreasonable, but I'm more inclined to support the idea of like 250 car allowance than the 3.
Okay. Okay. So, do you want to modify it, Tim, so that we can just, without having to, have this go down and then, and then have to vote, and then have to have another motion? Would you be willing to change that in order to make sure that we have consensus with everyone?
We're talking $600.
I know,
I think it's the most ridiculous conversation.
I know.
I don't care to amend my motion.
Okay. Oh,
Okay.
Roll call question.
All right, so
Roll call, Robert.
roll call. Okay.
Treasurer Rice.
Yes.
Trustee Houck.
No.
Trustee Milky.
No.
Trustee Lannan.
Yes.
Trustee Worley.
yes.
Clerk Cody, no.
Okay. It fails because it's 3-3.
Okay. I would like to make a motion that we consider for compensation for the 2020 increase for Mark in terms of the compensation package, that we offer 1 week vacation, and that we also offer a car allowance of $250 a month for, $250 a month for the year.
Second.
Discussion?
one comment. I agree, it's just $600, but there's a certain amount of reasoning that in my mind, it makes sense better. But I realize it's only $600 in the grand scheme of things.
What is the percentage?
Yeah.
that it makes me-
I agree with what you're saying too about the 600. I have the same reaction to it, but I don't want to see a split vote on this. I feel I think it's important to have a consensus. I think that shows not only support of the motion, but also support of our, manager for all that he's been doing, and I think it's very modest. So, we're talking, like I said, basically the cost of living. We're talking a COLA increase here, so.
Any more discussion?
Yeah, the only reason I would support this is comments made by the manager about there's enough divisiveness on this board without wanting to add to it. So I respect that. But the rationale as to lowering it, I think, in the board discussion he was spot on.
Any more? All right,
Roll call.
roll call.
Treasurer Rice?
Yes.
I didn't realize I wasn't speaking in the microphone. Trustee Hauk?
No.
Trustee Milky?
Yes.
Trustee Lannan?
Yes.
Trustee Worley?
Yes.
Cody? Yes.
And that's 4-1, or not 4,
5-1.
sorry, 5-1. So it passes.
Thank you for the consideration. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, moving on. Policy Governance 2.5, Financial Condition and Activities.
So this is on page
67.
67 of your agenda packet. This is where you have an opportunity to review the manager's compliance with Governance Policy 2.5, which is financial condition and activities. There's a lot of subsections to the policy, but at its highest level, it states that the manager shall not cause or allow the development of fiscal jeopardy or to deviate from the amended budget. There are several sub-policies that exist. There's some data in your report, or in your packet. It's on pages 19 through 33. That's the budget to actual report. I will say at this point that this is one of the policies that I'm working on to improve what's being presented to you and the data and that kind of thing. But at this point, the data that we have that supports, in my mind, compliance with the policy is one, the development of long-term projections for several of the funds. The reason we've done that was to help monitor compliance with this policy, and in its core, what we're trying to avoid is that we make decisions in the short term that jeopardize the long-term fiscal health. And by having some long-term projections that we update at least annually, we can help monitor that. There's 50 or 75% of the fiscal year that's been completed. If you look at the report, there's no department, there's no budgeted fund in the organization that has expended more than what would be expected at this time during the fiscal year, so we are well within the budget constraints. There is a subsection of the policy that talks about making sure there's a tax collecting agent for 6 or 7 other taxing units. There's statutory requirements that for these tax collections to be distributed to these other taxing units, and we have met those without fail every month of the year. The budget was amended at mid-year, which follows best practice guidelines. So based on that kind of overview, I suggest that we are in compliance with that policy.
Thank you. Motion, discussion?
Discussion.
I don't believe there's any real action needed on
Okay.
this.
Yeah, discussion?
Any discussion on this? I think it speaks for
I agree,
itself.
yeah.
And we are in compliance, so.
Yeah.
Right.
Well done.
All right. No further discussion, then we will move on to Policy Governance 4.3, Delegation to the Township Manager.
And this is kind of the opposite. This is where the Board of Trustees reviews its own actions against your policy. And this policy basically states three things. One, that the board will communicate and develop policies for communication to the administration as it relates to your ends. And that's so that we know what we are trying to accomplish. And the other is that you will develop policies so that I understand what our limitations are in trying to achieve those ends. And those are called executive limitations within your policy. And that as long as I am reasonably interpreting those and you feel I am, then I think we're kind of good. And so I think the discussion for you all is, are you monitoring and creating ends policies? Are you updating them when you feel it's appropriate? Are your limitations that you're imposing on the executive, the manager, are you comfortable with those? Do you need to adjust them? That type of thing. So.
I think we follow them.
So it's
Dis-
discussion.
Discussion?
No, I think we're following these.
I struggled with this one just a little bit. Partly with the history, but that I have very little here, for one. Excuse me.
Previous history.
Yeah, I
You're
think.
the newbie.
Yeah, I think from what I've seen, the board's in compliance with that. I think where I struggled was seeing some of the issues that are before this board that require action. It's going to be very important that this board act appropriately and come down with some proper policy that's very discreet and clear as to either what those limitations should be on the executive or, whatever it is. There's
Correct.
stuff that we're working on.
I know exactly what you're saying.
I know what you're talking about.
And I'm just trying to state, because it's not directly related to this, but we need to be very careful that we're eyeing exactly what this is asking us to do, right, in the coming months.
Yes,
Yes, I agree. Well said.
that's what I thought.
Otherwise,
And
as
that's why
far as I know, I think we're in
Oh,
I know
compliance.
that, yeah.
I was like, oh,
And that's for you all to decide amongst
Well-
yourself.
Okay. Any more discussion?
I thought we were gonna do what Brandon was talking about. That's why I was like, okay, we need to postpone this one until the next meeting, but no, totally. We're not. I'm fine.
All right. And seeing none, I will open up extended public comment. This is restricted to 5 minutes regarding any issue. Opened at 8:58.
Rhonda Brand, 775 Meadowbrook Drive. I guess I don't understand, how many people have you guys talked to as far as an increase? It was new to me what you were doing tonight, so this was a surprise. I had no idea he makes that much money. Has he ever had a vehicle compensation? What's wording on here? You're asking for
Car allowance?
car allowance, yes. Have you ever had one before?
We can't respond.
Yeah.
This
we-
is
When am I
this is
going
not
to
a
get my
discussion.
answers?
Yeah,
Okay.
you just need
When
to-
will I get my answers?
we're not allowed to respond to any of this. We can talk after probably, and that, so we can get you your answer, so.
Okay. One of the things I will be doing, will be talking to people as far as the decisions that you're making. I hear that you're having problems with some people are being paid more than others, blah, 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 and we're increasing managers. It's very frustrating.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda.
Thank you.
Any other? Okay. Seeing none, we will close public comment. Manager comments.
Thank you. I just have a couple. Regarding the recruitment for the boards and commissions, we do have information up on the website, the cable channel. I have reached out to the newspaper so they can try to run a little article. I asked about the next time they covered a board meeting that they mentioned the openings that we have upcoming and describing how people can apply. It was mentioned at the last meeting that Ms. Helwig, that's on the library, that you all had reappointed her, and that has not occurred. And so I just wanted to clarify that. We do have an application. She is interested, but I think it was indicated at the prior meeting that that had been taken care of. It still needs to be done. I think the priority for the end of the year is the Zoning Board of Administration. You have several members on that expiring on 12/31/19. I sent the board late in the day an updated listing from the regulatory agency on marijuana. Union Township is listed on that report, so that'll confirm the emails that went out earlier this week. And then finally, just want to let you know that I attended a kickoff meeting for a multi-jurisdictional stormwater management master plan creation earlier this week, which I think is real important for the township and the community at large. Anybody that recalls the rain event from a couple years ago. But the master plan, the study area, does include a portion of the township. The study's being funded by a 2% grant that the city applied for. The participants are the township, the city, university, tribe, MDOT, and I think I got all those covered. And the recommendations will come out. They'll be short and long-term in nature, and the recommendations and the cost to implement those will be divided kind of by jurisdiction, so the township will be able to actually use this document as we want to look at or have any discussions about stormwater management. So that's all. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, any final board member comment? Go ahead.
I think most of us attended a joint water presentation with the city of Mount Pleasant. We went to the meeting, we walked out. Haven't had any real discussion amongst ourselves. I don't know if there's been any discussion between management of the township and the city in regards to the presentation and anybody's thoughts on that.
Yeah, I threw my notes out from it here. If it ain't broke, we'll fix it. That's one thing I said.
And while people, thank you, that was one of my questions in my management comments that I missed, but I do need some direction, I think, on what to do next, if anything. The conversation that I've had with the city since that presentation is they're kind of waiting on us. They're not, I mean, what they do is kind of dependent on what we do.
Thanks for bringing that up, Tim.
Did you get the feeling if we had interest in one of the options out there, that they had interest, or Are they neutral, more thinking it's not for them?
I don't know that I can, I don't think I can give that a fair answer. You know, one of their their primary concern is the pressure. And there are opportunities for them to help to solve that pressure issue if the two entities do something. They're going to solve the pressure issue one way or the other. They just don't want to get going down their own road without knowing if we have any interest. But the first, in order to answer that question, I think is, for us, is, are we going to pursue softened water anymore? Bottom line.
I thought anecdotally that there was, that there wasn't much interest in walking. When I spoke to some folks after the meeting, that the costs were pretty prohibitive along the way. It seemed that there was one, the lime treatment was the one that seemed most feasible environmentally and what's already being done by the city. But then there were concerns, the fact that they fluorinate the water. And so then we're introducing to the township not only softened water, but also fluorinated. So then we have another issue to contend with as well. So it just seemed, for myself personally, it seemed more complex to do what we want to do. I thought it was more costly than what I assumed it would be. We may again they may look at their pressure, and we may look at, what we can do to soften the water, but it seems that if we do go into their water system, then we do sort of contaminate, and bad word to use, but, with the fluorine. So I think that was something that had some people concerned too, was my sense.
They said their system dates back 100 years when we were in there. I mean,
Yeah.
I wonder about lead issues, if there's any, that never got brought up that night.
No.
I mean, what happens if there's a lead issue on one of their lines? How old is our system?
It's
Our water
relatively
system?
new.
Part of it's 10 years old.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so.
Probably the oldest is
30?
Yeah, maybe 30,
Yeah.
maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah, it's relatively new.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you start crossing systems, you're also then picking up some additional problems that we currently don't have, and perhaps they would as well. So just again, what some of the feedback that I've heard from folks on both sides were that it just seemed more than what seemed feasible.
It seemed to me for the low-cost option of $23 million was a little bit outside of what we
Yeah,
gained
a little bit.
in the water.
Well, I think that 23 million was recouped in user fees, if you looked at the increases that would
Yes.
occur over time.
Yeah.
Yes.
They were
And that's
ridiculous.
what the sticker shock was for me, is to see how much that would increase the water fees. And I thought to myself at the time, we don't have the right to make that decision for our township. It
No.
needs to go to the ballot.
Yeah,
Because
definitely
this is
not.
a big deal, and do they want to really pay for this, or do they?
Yeah,
How
Right.
bad do they want it?
yeah.
Right.
Well,
And I don't know the answer to that.
That
Yeah.
increase was something like 17% immediate increase for folks in terms of, for the uses of the water. So, I mean, not only was it expensive from our end and the other things that I mentioned, but also then for the constituents. I mean, all of a sudden, that'd be sticker shock, all of a sudden getting a bill that'd be 70% higher, 17% higher than what they're currently paying. So that's a good point, And that went on,
Just
if
kept
I
going
recall,
up,
it
yeah.
went on for at least 5 years at that before it dipped down to like the 2.8 or 3% or something like that. So it was pretty expensive
Yeah, those
for the
annual
consumer.
increases.
Correct,
Yes.
correct.
Yeah,
I mean,
Yeah.
that's
that's a
huge.
lot.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
You're smiling.
Bill just cracks me up with his mouth.
So am I safe, is it safe for me to communicate to the city at least that we won't be pursuing softened water with them?
I think so.
I think
That,
so.
that doesn't close the
It's-
door to
That doesn't
pursuing softened water on our own.
Yeah.
Do you need us to take
Can't
motion
just
on
turn
that?
the valve on.
Do we need to?
I don't.
I don't think so. You
We have a
need
lot of heads
majority.
here. Is everyone in agreement with that? That, you know, that this
I
is
agree.
probably not the way to
I
go?
agree.
Yeah.
I'd agree, that's
That's a
kind
lot.
of a limited approach, though, just talking about softening water.
Yeah.
But, or you're just saying we're not interested in.
Hooking together,
The combined,
combining the two.
Because it is all based on softening, really.
Yeah, and there are other
Yeah,
advantages
I think that's,
to
appropriate.
syncing our systems or linking them. I mean, there's some redundancy and additional, I believe, right, that we would gain from that.
There's a larger issue if you want to start talking about regional water authorities that could make a lot of sense. You can pursue those independent of this at this time. Whatever the system would be, there still is a pressure issue in the southeast corner of the city that they're going to address. This is just saying, city, don't wait on the township to deal with your pressure issue. Does not close the door to regional water authority questions or even softening jointly in the future with the city, nor does it close the door on the township standing up its own water softening plant.
So I'd agree, those three options for softening probably don't fit
Right.
at this point in time with the township's
And-
focus.
For their pressure, it's way more cost effective for them just to build that.
Yeah, it was cheaper for
yeah,
them.
It was
it's
a
cheaper
lot
for them.
cheaper.
It was a couple thousand, I think a couple million, like 3 million or.
Yeah, and it was like
very-
23 for, yeah, or it was a
Correct.
lot.
And the other thing that I was struck with is that if we were to hook up and have this system, we would be shutting down a couple of our
Ours, yeah. The
plants.
plants.
And these are
Brand
good, new,
New,
functioning
yeah.
plants. I mean, so, you know, there's a loss that way too, to take them offline. So there's a considerable amount of inconvenience and expense that just doesn't make sense. You know, so.
This maybe should have been done 25 years ago when it got very close to being done.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct, correct. And it isn't just a simple connect two things, turn
Right.
one lot,
Turn it
valve
on.
on, turn it on. It doesn't work that way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further discussion, or?
Any other comments
Comments?
from boards?
Yep.
If I may.
Mr. Milky?
I'm sitting in Phil Mikes' seat, and I know he sat on the sustainability, and I know as we do our board reports these last two meetings, each of you are responsible, it sounds like, to attend certain meetings, and I didn't know if there was opportunity for, or a need for me to step in on one of those. What?
We can do the planning commission if you want to. The big one.
We can talk about that later.
That's the
but
one that's hard.
I just didn't know.
Yeah.
Thought I'd throw that out. And I probably should have brought this up during
One thing there
the,
is, though, if we aren't able to attend our meeting,
give me a
we
ring.
look for an alternate.
Yes, that's
person.
perfect.
Okay,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Put you in a rotation,
perfect.
coach.
I just wanted to throw it out there.
Give me the
I'm feeling
permanent
left out. I probably should have brought this up in the budget discussion, but I didn't think of it until later, so if I may now. One thing that bothers me when I look at the budget is you look at the 2020 projection, we would actually be doing some deficit spending, which isn't a bad thing because we have cash on hand. And it's, would be negligent to not spend down some of that cash within our community. And so I think that's the right thing to do. However, there is a perception there when people look at the bottom line and they go, why is that negative? And if I understand it correctly, the big reason that we would be negative in 20 is because we carried over a lot of projects from 19 that were not done that moved into 20.
Yes.
Okay, and so in many ways you could say, but we're not even still deficit spending because we just shifted where the money's being spent time-wise from 19 to 20. And I didn't know if there was a way to present the budget to indicate that.
I think that's a good point, because a deficit, I had forgotten to bring that up tonight.
So it was kind of a question to Mark if.
Yeah.
if
Well,
that-
the math is what it is,
Right,
you know. Your explanation,
right.
I think, was pretty concise and easy to follow, so if you need to message something, maybe everybody can use Brian's verbiage.
You got my cell.
Go Milky.
But I think also, if you look at the general fund balance chart, and this might be the best way you answer it, in the back of your book, it's that bar graph. And I'll take you to, and let's just look at 2013 and 14, for instance. Your fund balance went up from 13 to 14 in dollar numerical terms, but as a percentage of expenses, it went down. And so, you know, while there might be times where there's deficit spending in a particular fiscal year, I'm not sure how important that is. It's the trend, it's looking at history and looking at your policies. And I know what you're trying to, you know.
It's political.
It's political,
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
And, you know, like I say, if you can stand on this record, and that's easy to show, and you can explain with a little bit more verbiage that in any given year, and it usually has to do with capital projects that either don't get started or don't get finished, and they get carried forward. And, you know, my guess is that
Yeah.
the addition to fund balance at the end of this year will be at least as much as the reduction to fund balance that's budgeted in next year.
Right, yeah, and I've noticed that too, based on projected expenditures, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, it is, trust me, this board got hit in the past with exactly that, where we had excess, and then suddenly a deficit year, and it was because we took on a bunch of road projects that didn't get done from the previous year, same situation. And the board.
I'm pretty experienced at explaining
Well,
why it's okay to have deficit spending in a particular fiscal year. That doesn't really mean much.
no, and I agree, I'm happy to explain it too, but the public perception,
Correct.
this hall was full of people that were
Yes.
upset that you ran it into the red, the township's in the red, and it's like, no, time out, it isn't.
And
But hearing that message when they don't want to hear it doesn't
Right.
do any good.
Right.
And that's
so
why
I'll keep that in mind in the budget transmittal memo in the future, and even the one that will go with the adoption of the budget. Because I can head off some of that just by
Yeah.
Right.
acknowledging it in a memo and saying
Yeah.
Okay, say read the
something
memo.
about it.
Because in reality, I think we should be doing some deficit spending to a certain degree, like I said, because we don't want to build that war chest up so much that
Right.
it's beyond, and we're not, in other words, are we overtaxing or under?
And your
serving?
projections are
Yeah.
showing
Exactly.
you're drawing it down.
Yeah.
Right, right. And
Yep.
we're beginning to do that. and I'm happy to see that.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Someone want to make a motion?
A motion to adjourn.
Support?
All in favor?
Aye. Opposed? Okay. 9:18.